Yesterday we did a lot with the texture on the skull. A lot less texture on this one than on the other skull. Feel free to add more to it. This is what we did in the other class. So a ton of texture, a ton of topography, really simple stuff. Just using the tools to do the work for you instead of overthinking it, honestly. If you want to add more, add more. If you want to keep it kind of bare minimum, feel free to keep it bare minimum. We added a crack yesterday in it. That's fine. We started showing some dimension in the metallic of the hourglass. We'll do the book today and the actual glass in the hourglass, and then we'll be done. You'll have time to work on your getting to know the artist you didn't know assignment that's also due tonight. If you have not done that already, a lot of you guys have already knocked that out. Fantastic. All right, here we go. Sitting back from the drawing, seeing what looks rough. If anything looks rough, at the very least, I'm going to go back and try and boost some contrast. Pull out some brighter highlights inside of these lighter midtones. My art gum has worked really well for doing that, really digging down to the white of the paper in these spots. Try not to just have a solid white. Have some really, really subtle changes in midtones. That's a big deal in making realistic art, realistic looking illustrations. As cartoony as this is, there's still some highlights of realism. All right. We'll get a little warmed up with those things. If you can't get a brighter highlight, go a little bit darker around it and then blend out. That'll give you another mid-tone. Stuff like that really looks good. Stuff like that is what keeps your artists or keeps your patrons attention close up. If you can get them to walk up to your artwork from 15, 20 feet away, check in the win column. If they stay there and they're like, look at the texture there, look at the line technique here, surface, whatever, that's all gravy. Okay. 10, 15 feet away with your contrast, that's the big deal. All the details in between, these subtle changes in value, that's all easy to do, and that's what keeps your patrons. All right. Any questions real quick on what we did yesterday? There was a little bit of confusion on the teeth. Did we clarify that? More or less. Biggest thing is don't draw individual lines for your teeth. That creates chiclets. This guy's got jacked up enough teeth. He does not need to have just massive squares. You guys have any idea what chiclets are? They're like candy. I'm dating myself. Pull out some changes in highlights to create different contours in your skull. Make sure that your brow buries the eyes, and then it makes the nose protrude. Use all your tools, your blending stumps, your rags, your fingers. That's something that, as 2 weeks into the program, we should start to really have an understanding of what our tools are doing, or how we are manipulating these tools, what's working, what's not working. What's working for Mr. Ball is not necessarily working for me, and that's going to happen all the time. We're all different artists. Once we sit down and look at it, they tend to look similar. We just have the ability to manipulate our pieces in different ways. Taking what I say with a grain of salt. What I say is not rule of law. It is merely a suggestion. Not yet. Well, yeah, you are. I tend to save my ebony pencil for the end. A lot of times I won't even need it, but there is no real rules. If you want to start throwing in some ebony, why not? It's ballsy, not stupid. All right, with the glass, glass is reflective. Glass is, it shows what's going on in the background. It doesn't really have any distinct properties as far as color goes. It just reflects your light source. It reflects things around it. Don't think that you're drawing what's in here, okay? Or don't think that you're drawing this reflection. Just pay attention to your reference. Look at some changes in value, these shapes, these amorphous shapes of highlights and lowlights, and add those in. So I'm going to start off with a 2B pencil. I don't want to go too dark just yet. And I've zoomed in a lot. And this is showing me that I've got some framing lines here, or framing shadows here. I got a weird looking oval looking shape here. And then I have a reflection of one of these spindles. And then there's a lot of like distortion in it, okay? Zoom into your reference and start thinking about those things. If I go with a 2B pencil, it might be too dark. So try it out. If it's not dark enough, or if it's too dark, switch over to a 2H like I did. And I'm dragging from that line, my original line, up to frame. From this original line, fade it in. This way it looks like a little bit thicker of an outline, but it doesn't have a really hard edge. Like if I did that with a 2B pencil or a 6B pencil, I would have this giant chunk of shadow. I would have this giant chunk of shadow that does not work, okay? I want it to be kind of narrow. And if I have any changes in like shadow, I can come back with my 2. Like here, I have a little bit of reflection. I don't know what it is. Just really closely observing right there. It gets a little bit thinner, then darker. Maybe a little bit darker here. I can still see the edge, minus a heavy outline. It doesn't look like it's glowing really. If it does, soften it out with your finger, your rag, or your blending stump. I've got a pretty evident change in value here from the edge of this spindle to about here. It's down almost like the same width as that. So I don't know what this is reflecting or magnifying. I have a thin outline. With my 2B, I'm just gonna color it in. Color it in the same direction, try and fill up that space. If you need to go darker, just do not go too heavy-handed. The more heavy-handed you go, the more difficult it is to erase out the necessary highlights in it. Coloring in the same direction, big deal. Soften it out. Not entirely sure if that's just magnifying what's going on behind it or underneath it rather. Frankly, who cares? I see it, so I'm going to draw. And same thing here. I've got kind of this shadow shape right underneath that. Something like that. Maybe not as dark. It's already there. And a straight line. So some C's in a straight line, maybe a little bit darker here. Again, instead of making outlines, try to color in a lot. The highlights are where this starts to really pop out as glass. Highlights, just like our shadows, just trust what you see. Your eyes aren't lying to you. Try and draw what you see, or render what you see. If I take any of my erasers, I've got a chunk of shadow over here, or highlight rather, right along my edge, and I got a little bit of space. A little bit of space, and it flicks out into my highlight or into my low light. Need more coffee. You can add some more too if you want, just don't overdo it. And when you're doing these things, pay homage to your reference. If you feel like you need to add something else to it, do it calculatedly. If you just half-ass it, then probably shouldn't swear on camera or in general. If you do not put forth your best effort, it will it might show up a little bit more. Okay, pay attention to your reference, pay homage to your reference. Reflection. I got this weird kind of zigzag shape. It's not as visible as those super highlights, but it's there. Play around with your different erasers. I've got almost a horizontal line here, or vertical rather. If that's too thick, I can always soften it back out so it didn't happen. Use a sharper eraser. You can add some more lines if you want. Don't feel like you need to. Don't feel like you can't go over these shadows too. Having that shadow broken by a highlight looks good. And then coming down, there's a lot of information down here, especially in the highlights. If I have a really hard line, subtracted there. So instead of having an additive line, I have a subtracted line. Definitely makes it look like glass. And then I have a really thick line, thick shadow that converges. And it makes this funky looking shape down here, ends on my board here. Heavy outline. And then I might as well just take my kneaded eraser, or any eraser really, block in that shadow, or block in that highlight. So instead of just working with lines, we can work with giant chunks of shape. I'm just using my Prismacolor eraser. It does not erase out quite as vividly as my Tough Stick, but it definitely shows up. And then I can use my Tough Stick for any of those harder lines. Weird looking shapes. Got some changes in value that come down right from my funnel. And you'll start to see some contour in the glass too. As I get to this side, these lines start to mimic that line. As I'm on this side, those lines start to mimic that line. And we can always boost contrast by adding to. So if I wanted to add more, maybe I just take my blending stump, go a little heavier handed from my book up into my glass. That's going to make my brights brighter. If you're worried that your highlights aren't showing up enough, go a little bit darker around it. Especially with your rag or your blending stump, you can easily erase out, and that makes that highlight look a lot brighter. Got a reflection of this thing coming up my glass there. That's going to make this highlight look brighter. If you need to add anything in here, if it's a lighter spot like mine, I'm going to go 2H. Some of these 2H lines will make my highlights even brighter. I'm losing my book, outline with my 2H. Just drag that outline a little bit onto the hourglass. That's going to push the book forward. Cast a little bit of an imaginary shadow onto my glass. Got a lot of those shadows over here, especially. There's a lot of information on this side. Coming up, it's probably reflecting the book. That wedge. Another wedge here. Got a little bit of information, almost like a Christmas looking tree. Happy trees. Couple dots. Maybe frame that highlight a little bit more, the 2H pencil. Bunch of information. All right. I'm relatively satisfied with the hourglass. As far as an illustration goes, I'm okay with it. Got a lot of information to do on this book. Before I feel confident in calling it a week. So I'm going to eliminate the buckle. If you want to have your Dear Diary buckle, go for it. I'm going to make the artistic license decision to say, no, I don't want that. Bless you. When we drew the book, we talked a lot about planes. We talked a lot about architecture. This book by itself is a cube. And then on top of it, there's another cube. On below it, there's another cube with a side plane, top plane, other side plane, side plane, side plane, side plane, side plane, top plane. The binding itself is another cube. We see this side plane and this other side plane. If we think of it as a cube, we can have very, very similar shades. So I'm going to use my graphite chunk just really lightly on this side. Go along with the pages. I'm going to blend it. Blending stump. Again, going along with the flow of the pages. And this is going to solidify my value. I know that this plane is going to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to go 2B. This plane's a little bit lighter. This plane's a bit darker. Because of the texture of the book, you can be a little scratchy. There's some changes in plane with the pages over here, so not a perfectly straight line. What's up, Kobe? Not a perfectly straight line. But since I have this plane done, I'm going to need to do the same thing to this plane. Same value. It's showing a little bit darker on my top plane as it's casting a shadow from the book, so maybe I go 6. Ballsy. Got a lot of shadow underneath my top cover. So this is my 6. Really quick line, a little bit thinner on this side, just along the bottom line of that book cover. Again, we got to have this dimension. If we don't have the dimension, it's going to look terrible. It's going to look like we did not pay attention to our reference. And these planes are going to be our highlights. So I'm going to blend all this out first. And then eliminate my highlights subtractively as opposed to adding it in with a change in value or a more graphite. Blend that down onto my pages. Blend this out this way. Blend this down. Now this underline here where I had that line grounding my book, I can solidify that a little bit more with either a 2B or a 2H. I'm using a 2B. Again, we're making up some of these pages on the back side here. Our reference cuts off. I don't need a hard outline over here. That's all going to be done with a change in texture instead of a change in value or a line. If I need to add any more, I can. It can be a little inconsistent just because it's an old book. And just like I've done with everything else, take your erasers, make your erasers do a lot of the work for you. I've got a bright highlight on this corner. This is where my highlight emanates, so I'm going to flick out from that corner that way. Pay attention to how hard you're pressing down. We don't want this to be a golden book. We want it to kind of be beat up. So whatever I erase out, I'm probably going to soften back in just with my finger so it stands out, but not as a metallic thing. And if I need to outline anything, 2H. Really light gray pencil to outline will not make it look like it's a Sharpie. It'll eliminate the coloring book aspect of it. It doesn't afford you the opportunity to do that. And then as far as the texture goes, there's some darker spots. There a 2B or 2H pencil you can add. And then a little bit of highlights in between. You can kind of stipple, similar to what we did with the lemon or the wood grain even. Just a little bit of information, just to break up that solid shade. And all I'm doing is kind of just seizing with my eraser in my hand. Before we do the paper, I'm gonna go a little bit darker with it on my shadow side. As far as the paper goes, a bunch of striae lines, bunch of hard lines, blend, then a bunch more hard lines, blend, and then we'll add some pages that are sticking out. That's going to break this contour here, this line. If you can still see that line, it should be fine. If it's really, really vivid, erase it out. Like, really soften it out. We're going to break it up anyway, so you might as well do that. When you do your pages, you can use a scratch sheet of paper if you want any hard lines. I'll do this a lot. Make sure that you're going with your with the pages don't have pages going this way and up, and try and follow that diagonal. Change how your paper is, or your eraser is erasing. Instead of going sharp all the time, have some sharp lines, have some that are broad. It's kind of difficult to see. But this way you get different changes in value. And like I said, soften it out with your finger, soften it out with your rag, and then repeat the process. If you don't want to use the straight edge, you can freehand it. Same thing. Back and forth, use your entire arm. And once you get to this point, change your directions. You're not really going to have as much highlights on this side, but you're going to have some. And where you have some changes in really like pages sticking out, press down even harder. Click out on both sides. I'm going to have this guy sticking out really far. Why not? We can do whatever we want. Soften it, do it again. It's just going to give you the illusion that there's hundreds and hundreds of pages because of these striae lines, blended striae lines, blended striae lines, blended. And then where I have those pages that are really sticking out, like I can have a page that's really sticking out there, where I broke my line here. If I use a 2B, it's going to be really dark. Consider starting with a 2H. Outline that page on the bottom. Drag a shadow down. Say 2H pencil. If I need to go any darker, 2B. I got something stuck on my paper there. It's not a bad idea to take your 2H pencil. It was a 2B. Like I said, it's not a bad idea to take your 2H pencil on top of those highlight lines, have some lines that are additive. On your shadow side, maybe go 2B. Just casting even more of a shadow. If you need to outline the top part, just a little tiny bit with your 2H, really gray, just to give it some more relief. But the point of this is to provide an illusion. This is not drawing each individual strand of hair. This is not drawing each individual page. We are giving the illusion of volume and big book. On this side over here, I'll subtract a little bit. Also, just to provide some information on the pages. If it looks too dark or too bright rather, blend it in. All my lines go with my flow of my paper. I've got texture. My book looks a little funky underneath my skull, so I'm going to try and rectify that. Cast a little bit of shadow. Again, apologies for the repetition. If I'm outlining anything, 2H pencil. Try not to have a solid outline if you can avoid it. Let's just make some lines a little bit more crisp. Stuff that we can marry ourselves to. I need to frame it with a value change. Maybe go with a B pencil 2B. If you use your 2H, you'll probably be digging in a lot. But more power to you. If you want to try it, go for it. The composition's almost done. This is where I would come back with my ebony pencil if you feel the need to. Boost some of your shadows on your positive space on these objects. If you can avoid blending it, awesome. So maybe don't press down quite as hard. Your ebony is just an option if you feel like you need to go a little bit darker. Remember, when you go a little bit darker, that makes your highlights a little bit more brighter. So if I go this dark, I need to make sure that I'm adding that same dark throughout the canvas so that I can keep my eye moving around the picture. This makes my brights a little bit brighter, for sure. Sitting back, I kind of want to have a little bit more dark inside of my skull, maybe a little bit more texture inside my skull to provide contrast without darks and lights. So maybe a little bit of that stipple texture, a little bit more of those lines going up my nose, just like I did on the other class's skull. Move it around a lot. You don't have to add cracks, but same style of value that we did in our lemon, we can do in our skull. And in context, it looks like just changes in bone density, maybe. You have contrast between lights and darks, and you have contrast between textures all the time. That's why you want to have a variety of textures in your compositions. Suppose the same thing over and over and over and over again. That's boring. A little bit of line work. I think that's where we'll stop. We've got just a couple minutes to the bell, or a minute to the bell. My bad, guys. I'll post this video. If you want to take anything home, feel free to take it now or come by after school. This isn't going to be due until either Friday of next week or early into the week after we get back. So don't press. On Wednesday when we get back, we'll start another drawing. Looking at form, a human form, as opposed to these geometric things. I'll get this video posted. You guys get cleaned up,